biggest story.
John Carter had never believed in luck. Luck was for the rich, the privileged, the ones who didn't have to scrape together pennies to keep the lights on. For men like John, life was a relentless grind, a series of days bleeding into nights, each one burdened by bills, exhaustion, and the quiet guilt of not being able to give his wife and kids the life they deserved. John lived in a cramped, run-down apartment with his wife Sarah and their 2 children, Daniel and Lily. Their home was a place where the fridge often hummed with emptiness, where overdue bills piled on the kitchen counter, and where the ceiling leaked every time it rained. Despite working long shifts at the auto shop, he barely made enough to cover rent and food, and medical expenses were a luxury they couldn't afford. Daniel needed new shoes for school. Lily dreamed of ballet classes she could never take, and Sarah, she had stopped dreaming altogether. That night, as John trudged home after another back-breaking shift, something made him stop at the convenience store near the corner of his apartment building. Maybe it was the flashing neon sign, or maybe it was the defeated look in Sarah's eyes that morning when she had confessed they were behind on rent again. Either way, he found himself fishing the last crumpled dollar bill from his pocket and buying a lottery ticket. A desperate, foolish attempt to believe that, just maybe, fate had one good thing left for him. Across town, in a neighborhood just as worn down but filled with a different kind of hope, Emily walked carefully along the cracked pavement, a small brown paper bag clutched tightly in her hands. She had just picked up her grandmother's medicine, careful not to drop it. It had taken all the spare coins from their jar to afford it. Emily and her grandmother Margaret lived in a 1-bedroom apartment where love was abundant but money was scarce. Margaret worked as a cleaner despite her aching joints, and Emily helped however she could, running errands and making sure they stretched every dollar as far as possible. At only 10 years old, Emily understood struggle in a way no child should. But her grandmother had always told her, being poor is no excuse for being dishonest. We may not have much, but we have our dignity. It was that very lesson that would be tested when Emily's foot accidentally nudged a small slip of paper lying on the sidewalk. A lottery ticket, crumpled, slightly dirty, but still intact. She bent down, picking it up, not knowing that in her hands lay a fortune that could change lives forever. On one side of the city, a man was about to lose everything. On the other, a child was about to face a choice that could define who she would become, and neither of them had any idea that fate had just bound them together in the most unexpected way. John slumped onto the sagging couch in his cramped apartment, exhaustion pressing down on his shoulders. His 2 kids had long since gone to bed, their soft breathing the only sound breaking the silence. His wife, Sarah, sat across from him at the rickety kitchen table, flipping through an old stack of bills. Their conversations had grown shorter, their words stretched thin by the endless strain of making ends meet. Then, as the lottery numbers flashed across the television screen, John's entire world tilted. Tonight's winning Powerball numbers are 5, 12, 19, 27, 34, and the Powerball number 9. His breath caught. He yanked the crumpled lottery ticket from his pocket, his fingers trembling. His eyes darted between the screen and the numbers printed on the paper. 5, 12, 19, 27, 34, 9. A perfect match. He had won. Not just a small sum, not just a couple $100s. No. John Carter had just won millions. Euphoria crashed into him like a tidal wave. He turned to Sarah, barely able to speak, thrusting the ticket toward her. As realization dawned on her, tears welled in her eyes. John, we won." They imagined everything, the debts they would pay, the home they would finally own, the secure future for their children. Sarah sobbed as she imagined a fridge full of food, a warm winter coat for Daniel, and ballet lessons for Lily. But just as quickly as the euphoria came, it vanished. When John reached for the ticket again, intending to place it somewhere safe, his fingers met nothing but air. His stomach plummeted. The ticket was gone. Panic clawed at his chest. He and Sarah tore apart the apartment, searching desperately. The air grew thick with frustration, their voices rising in fear. But it wasn't there. John bolted out the door, running down the dimly lit apartment steps, his feet barely touching the ground. He burst onto the street, scanning the cracked pavement. The city was dark, and there was no sign of the ticket. Emily stared at the ticket, her mind waging war between desire and conscience. The money could change everything for her and her grandmother. She imagined a warm apartment, enough food, medicine without hesitation. But was it right to keep it? The thought gnawed at her, an internal battle that refused to settle. She sat in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at her grandmother as the old woman folded clothes with slow, deliberate movements. "Grandma," Emily whispered, "what if you found something that could make your life better, but it belonged to someone else?" Margaret set down the shirt she was folding and looked at Emily with wise, tired eyes. "The question isn't what I would do, baby. It's what you can live with. Can you hold on to something that isn't yours and still sleep peacefully at night?" Emily hesitated. But what if they don't deserve it? What if they waste it? What if they're not good people? Margaret sighed and reached for Emily's hands. "Child, life isn't always fair, and people aren't always what they seem when they're desperate. But doing what's right isn't about them. It's about you. When you lie down at night, can you close your eyes knowing you did the right thing?" Emily's grip on the ticket tightened. "But Grandma, we need this money. You wouldn't have to work so hard anymore. We could eat well every night." Margaret's expression softened. "I won't lie and say it wouldn't help us. But what would happen if you kept it? Would you always wonder if you did the right thing? Would the guilt grow inside you like a shadow, never letting you enjoy it?" Tears burned at the corners of Emily's eyes. "I don't know. I just want things to be easier for us." Her grandmother cupped Emily's face gently. "You have something money can't buy, my love. Your integrity. Don't trade that for anything, not even all the money in the world." Emily swallowed hard, staring down at the ticket. She had to decide. The next day, Emily found John outside a convenience store. He was pacing, his face dark with frustration. She watched as he snapped at a passerby, his voice tight with desperation. Emily took a step back. Maybe he wasn't a good man. Maybe he didn't deserve this money. Her fingers tightened around the ticket in her pocket. Maybe she should just walk away. But later, as she passed by the street where John lived, she saw something else. Something different. John was outside his apartment, kneeling in front of his children. His wife stood behind him, hands on his shoulders, whispering something into his ear. Emily saw his shoulders shake, saw the way his children clung to him, their small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. He wasn't just a man who had lost a lottery ticket. He was a father who was afraid of failing his family. Emily felt her heart squeeze. She had spent all night debating whether or not to return the ticket, thinking about what was right and wrong. But standing there, watching John hold his children like they were the only thing keeping him grounded, she realized something. It wasn't about who deserved the money. It was about doing the right thing, no matter what. She took a deep breath, walked up to John, and held out the ticket. "This belongs to you." John looked at her, stunned. "What?" "I found it," Emily said, "and I think it's yours." John took the ticket with shaking hands, his eyes welled with tears. I don't know what to say." Emily smiled, a warmth settling in her chest. "You don't have to say anything. Just take care of your family." John wiped at his face, overwhelmed. "Thank you. Thank you so much." As Emily walked away, she felt lighter, as if a weight had lifted from her shoulders. She didn't have $1,000,000, but she had something just as valuable, the knowledge that she had done the right thing. John wasted no time. The very next morning, he and Sarah took the ticket to the lottery office, the excitement barely contained in their trembling hands. This was it. This was the moment that would change their lives forever. They handed the ticket to the clerk, who carefully examined it before typing the numbers into the system. John held Sarah's hand tightly, their breath caught in their throats. The tension in the room was unbearable. Then the clerk frowned. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, looking up, "but this ticket is not the jackpot winner. John's stomach dropped. What? But I checked the numbers. They matched. The clerk nodded sympathetically. You did match the winning numbers, but only for a secondary prize. You've won $50,000. Silence. Sarah's grip on John's hand tightened. 50,000? She whispered, as if trying to process the words. It wasn't millions. It wasn't life-changing in the way they had imagined. But it was something. Enough to clear debts, to breathe easier, to start fresh. John exhaled slowly. He turned to Sarah, searching for disappointment in her eyes. But instead, he found something else. Relief. It's enough, she whispered. It's enough. And for the first time in a long time, John believed it. As John stood holding the ticket, his hands still trembling, he realized something. The money he had been so desperate for, the money he had lost all hope of ever seeing again, wasn't what truly mattered. He looked at his wife and children, who had come outside after hearing his voice crack with emotion. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not because of the ticket, but because she saw something change in him, a shift, a realization. He had been so consumed with despair that he had forgotten the reason he had bought the ticket in the first place, not to chase wealth, but to secure a future for his family. And in that moment, he understood something deeper. It wasn't the ticket that had given him a second chance. It was Emily. Emily walked away from John, feeling lighter than she had in days. The war inside her had finally settled. She had made the right choice, and deep down, she knew that mattered more than any amount of money ever could. When she got home, her grandmother was waiting for her at the kitchen table, her wise eyes filled with silent questions. "Did you do what you thought was right?" Margaret asked gently. Emily nodded slowly. "I did." Her grandmother smiled, nodding in approval. "And how do you feel?" Emily thought for a moment. "Good, but also a little sad." Margaret took Emily's hands in hers. "That's how you know you truly did the right thing, my love. Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel like winning. It feels like losing something. But in the end, you gain more than you ever knew you needed." Emily squeezed her grandmother's hands, understanding now what she had meant all along. In the weeks that followed, John and his family didn't become rich. The lottery winnings turned out to be far less than expected. Enough to pay off debts, enough to start fresh, but not enough to live extravagantly. And that was okay, because what they had now was gratitude. John reached out to Emily and her grandmother, inviting them over for dinner one night. It was a simple meal, nothing extravagant, but it was filled with warmth, laughter, and a quiet acknowledgement of the choices that had led them all there. Before Emily left that evening, John knelt down beside her, looking at her seriously. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me," he said. "I don't know what kind of person I would have become, but because of you, I get to be better. And I promise, I'll never take that for granted." Emily smiled. "You already are better. You just needed a little reminder. And now, what about you? Would you have done what Emily did? Would you have kept the ticket, convincing yourself that you needed it more? Or would you have handed it back, knowing it belonged to someone else?" Some might argue that John didn't deserve it, that his desperation made him act selfishly. Others might say that Emily was too naive, that she should have taken care of her own future first. What do you think? This story isn't just about luck. It's about integrity, second chances, and the power of human kindness. John learned that true wealth wasn't in money, but in the people he loved. Emily learned that honesty, though difficult, is its own reward. Margaret knew all along, dignity was the greatest treasure of all. And now, what about you? What would you have done?